America, bonjour, hi, Canada. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Good morning. Mollie Hemingway, executive editor of The Federalist, also Fox News contributor, joins me. Good morning, Mollie. How are you?
Great to be here with you.
Mollie, I want to talk about the latest attack on Justice Thomas. I've been waiting for 5 days to talk about this with you. For 30 years, the left and legacy media, and that sometimes is the same thing, have hated Clarence Thomas. Now, I had the good fortune to know him in the Reagan years a little bit, and I've met him once since, and he's been a guest on my show. But I don't know him in the way that maybe you do. But I do know that the legacy media is obsessed with him. And yesterday, Jake Sherman and I kind of sparked it up a little bit because Punchbowl said serious questions have been raised. There is no serious question. Justice Thomas has done nothing wrong. But how has it been presented inside the Beltway, Mollie?
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned, first off, about how these attacks on Justice Thomas have been going on for well more than 30 years. Yes, in the Beltway, there is a report from a left-wing media group that says that Justice Thomas has a very wealthy friend who has taken Justice Thomas on trips and holidays together, and that he has failed to report this as required by the law. The problem being there's absolutely no such requirement of any of this, or hasn't been for the entirety of his time as a justice, and that these types of trips have been taken by other justices. I mean, I think Justice Brewer took like 235 such trips that weren't reported, weren't reported officially. And so it's trying to impeach an unimpeachable character, which is what I would say about Justice Thomas.
Well, he is unimpeachable, as is Ginny Thomas. But there is a continual conflation of insinuation, innuendo, and a bare fact here and there. Harlan Crow's a very wealthy man. Harlan Crow has extended generosity to the Thomases. Everybody in Washington, D.C., and I mean everybody, takes care of the justices and other judges who are district court and federal court judges. Everybody does it as well for members of the clergy. Everybody does it for journalists, Mollie. And there is no ethical breach. Moreover, Article 3 judges are independent of Congress. And this insinuation never ends, does it?
It doesn't. And yeah, that's what they're trying to say. They're like, there are rules for other people that if they were to have a friend like this or have relations like this, they might have to report some aspect of it if they're in Congress or if they're a federal bureaucrat. So therefore, Justice Thomas is evil and wrong. Well, that doesn't mean that Supreme Court justices have such reporting requirements. He actually put out a statement saying that when he had this friendship that had this type of aspect to it, he talked to advisors about what he needed to report and what he didn't need to report, and was told he didn't need to report this. But it's not really about this anyway. None of this is about Justice Thomas having a super wealthy friend. I want to just make one other point, though. Justice Thomas is probably one of the least wealthy Supreme Court justices in history. He's known for, in fact, taking his RV around the country when he goes on vacation and parking it in a Walmart parking lot because those are the kinds of people he likes to hang out with. The idea that this guy is corrupted by having like one wealthy friend is ridiculous. But again, it's not about that. It's about the fact that Justice Thomas is very clear in his legal reasoning that he's an important presence on the court in a manner that liberals would like him not to be.
You know, Mollie, I also think there's a larger agenda at work. They want to smear him as his work gains incredible reputation for its clarity. Now, I don't agree with the justice on his particular approach to substantive due process and his anti-incorporation, many things in the law. I don't agree with him. But if I want someone to understand originalism, I give him his opinion in McDonald versus City of Chicago, because it's completely fairly articulated there. The animus is race-based. That's why they hate Clarence Thomas. Am I correct?
Oh, it's not even, I don't think anyone even disputes that. I think you might even have many people on the left admitting that. This is a black man, and he very much, even probably some of the disagreements that you have, such as on substantive due process, are related to his care and concern for certain provisions as they relate to the history of black Americans. And he comes out very differently than how white liberals would like him to come out. And they tried saying for years that he didn't do anything. And it turned out that he was having so much effect on the court, shaping its jurisprudence so much that became a laughable lie. And now they're just trying to tear him down and get rid of him. They've been obsessed with wanting to get rid of him, since he was first even hinted at as a nominee.
And doesn't surprise me in its timing. Not as conspiracy theorist, but Amul Thapar has a new book coming out. Judge Thapar has a brilliant new book about Clarence Thomas coming out, about how he always identifies with the underdog in these cases. He's always aware of, like in Kelo, who's getting screwed by government. And he's very much onto the facts of that. And so they've got a great, well-researched book by one of the most respected federal judges out there, district court judge nominated by Trump to the Sixth Circuit. He's on the Sixth Circuit now, and a superstar. And he's writing this book, and now we get this ProPublica nonsense. And I weary of whether or not we're ever going to change the culture of Washington, D.C.
I do too. Writing the Kavanaugh book with Carrie Severino, Justice on Trial, we were motivated in large part because of what we had seen happen with Justice Thomas. She clerked for Justice Thomas. We knew how the left would never stop trying to destroy this man, that when he made it onto the court, they did not view that as a victory that should chasten them in any way. They knew they would just continue their project, and they have tried to tear him down for decades. The Kavanaugh operation was a repeat of the Thomas operation, which is why anyone who saw it happening should have known it from the moment it started, that this was just the same thing we saw as with Justice Thomas. But it does seem that the left's attacks on the courts are increasing, that they are getting more brazen. And I do worry about it because the courts are the one institution that they have not been able to completely overtake.
I also want to point out they're attacking the Federalist Society and Leonard Leo on a consistent, extensive, continuing basis. And the Stanford meltdown was over a Trump judge, conservative judge, on a prestigious law school campus. And I didn't think it was particularly fair for the judges who've said no Stanford law review students need to apply to us, because it's a wide net, right? It gets Federalist Society members who are themselves the victim. But it is an indication that the judges are aware, and they're going to fight back, Mollie, and I applaud that. Do you?
I love that they're fighting back. And I do want to defend Judge Ho and the other federal judge who said this. I do think you need to do something intense, and that, in fact, more judges should sound the alarm, and that people should know that there are consequences to getting an education from a school that will not teach you some of the foundational principles of being a judge, of being a good attorney, and that if you don't push back hard, they just won't feel the pressure of the heat to do what they need to do. Judge Duncan never deserved to have his daughters attacked like that. He's brilliant, as you know, on so many issues that matter in the First Amendment. The idea that you shouldn't attack any judge. The idea you attack someone like Judge Cal Duncan is really reprehensible.
Well, I think what's going on there is just an attempt to delegitimize the Federalist Society because it's so effective. It's so good. And there have been some, I'm not now a member. I don't join anything for this reason. I want to be able to defend the Federalist Society against all comers. It's a marvelous substitution of what used to happen on academic campuses, which on law school level have gone just so decidedly left. I don't know if you've already got another book. If you ever do it, you and Carrie get together again, just do law school faculties. They are completely unhinged.
It's bad. It's getting worse. And I do want to say you're absolutely right that the attacks on the Federalist Society are because they're effective. I think that people should think about whether there's a way to expand what the Federalist Society has done for law schools and for the legal profession, and think about other ways. You know, when the Federalist Society started, they were operating without anything to their benefit, and they've made dramatic and important change and made a sort of a rescue operation for a lot of good lawyers and judges. There should be things like this for the administrative state, for academia in general. You know, the model's there, it's been deployed, it's done good work, and it's being attacked because it's done good work. So replicate it and expand it.
Now, I want to get one more comment from you having to do with Hillsdale. The New Yorker went up to Hillsdale, and they said very predictable things. Very predictable thing. Are they next in line for the legacy media's attacks?
Well, I get to teach at Hillsdale at our Kirby Center in Washington, D.C., which I love. My students are wonderful. Hillsdale has been under attack a little bit for several years. It does seem, again, to be increasing. This piece in the New Yorker was kind of hilarious in how obsessed it was with trying to be negative about a school. It's clearly a crowning jewel in the Academy right now. But yeah, I'd expect more.
You know what the poker tell was in that article, Molly? Their criticism of small city gentry types who have made their modest fortunes in obscure industries. It's just so self-revealing. They can't even control their poker tells. MZ Hemingway on Twitter. We have got a terrible shooting in Louisville. We have a massive national security problem with the leaks. And we have Byron York to discuss both, as well as a few other topics. Byron York with the DC Examiner, also, of course, with Fox News. Good morning, Byron.
Good morning, Hugh.
You're one of my go-to guys on pop culture. So I assume you're caught up on Succession.
Well, as a matter of fact, I am.
All right, no spoilers, please. Did it occur to you that there's no one who is a good person in that show? Not one person. I was talking with my son last night. In The Sopranos, we came up with one or two people who were good people. But in White Lotus, there are none. And in Succession, there are negative people. I mean, they turn not bad people into terrible people. Am I wrong?
I think that is the most important observation you can make about this, because you're absolutely right. And it's something that kind of wears on me, and I just kind of ultimately give up, because I want to actually find somebody with some redeeming qualities. You're absolutely right about the Sopranos, and that there were such people. And this is a show in which just everybody is horrible.
And White Lotus was, too. I won't watch season 2 because there wasn't a likable person. There wasn't a good person. And I just can't. I don't understand. Is that like the writer has to write that? Even Ted Lasso's kind of gone down the bad hill. Everyone's got to be deeply flawed, I guess.
Well, these I have not seen. But I did start watching Succession, and it was, in my view, kind of erratic. There were some episodes that were just tremendous and others that were kind of boring. And I will say it's very difficult to discuss this season.
No, we can't.
Spoilers.
We can't. So I just wanted to know if you identify a good
every
person.
Single person is bad. No,
everyone is bad, and it's not for children. All right, second non-leak question. Senator Cruz gave a slashing podcast yesterday. Senator Cotton slashing away all over the place at Team Biden's incoherence. And it occurred to me both of those would be traditional vice presidential picks, meaning young and on the attack. Have you thought about them in that term?
Well, yes. The one thing about Senator Cotton is that and both of them are just smart as they can be. I mean, they're eminently qualified to be a vice presidential candidate. Now Senator Cotton said he was not going to run. He had done a lot of exploring. He was traveling in Iowa and New Hampshire, and had done a lot of exploring of a presidential race of his own, and said he was not going to run because he wanted to spend more time with his family, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, his boys. Yep.
His young children. And so I'm not sure how joining a presidential ticket would work. Also, my guess is, and I'm not giving inside information. I've not spoken to him about this. But, you can look at the situation in the Republican Party and say, it's a gamble, but I think 2028 would be better, especially if you're in your 40s and you've got time. So perhaps that calculation is being...
That's not true about Ron DeSantis, right? The window is wide open.
Ron DeSantis he's in the perfect spot to run. He's been reelected. He is the governor of Florida. He's has a strong record there, and in 28 he's the former governor of Florida, and that's always more difficult.
Have you watched his exchange with Larry Arnn at Hillsdale on Thursday night yet?
No, I didn't. I know he went to Hillsdale, but I haven't watched it yet.
It's a very, very interesting exchange. The speech is I think the standard stump speech, but the exchange in which he says Disney is a joke, and threatens Disney that, they tried to sneak in these development agreements before we dissolved the special district, and now they're going to get 3 times as much pain. And that saying on the web, which you can't say, the FCC-approved version is screw around and find out. That now Disney's going to find out. It's really brass-knuckled politics. And so if you're DeSantis, let's say you're Trump or DeSantis, the two front runners, and you're looking around, people are thinking ethnic balance, all that sort of. Actually, you want Bob Dole 76, right?
What do you mean? I mean, about Bob Dole, 70s.
He was Gerald Ford's running mate, and Democrat wars. He was a slasher.
He was a slasher, although he was a very funny slasher. I mean,
yes,
Dole was a very funny man.
But it wasn't about winning Kansas. They were going to win Kansas. It's we're going to win Texas and Arkansas. It's about mission, destroy Democrats.
But I'm wondering. I don't think Bob Dole ever became the vice president.
No, he just was nominated.
That's what I'm saying.
So they lost. If they had held it a week before or a week after, they would have won. And Jerry Ford, after he pardoned Richard Nixon, was down 30 points. It's an amazing. So, Byron, let me get to the leak. This is a huge story. I really don't know how to handle it. All I know is it's a terrible blow to our national security, and the light's beginning to go on in the media, isn't it?
Well, I was listening to your conversation with David Drucker about this, and the one thing I've been thinking about this leak is that, and you were mentioning the Pentagon Papers earlier, which is like a million years ago. There have been some extremely serious national security leaks in the past years that were, if not tolerated, actually cheered on. In late 2016, early 2017, during the Trump transition, there was a leak of Trump's incoming national security advisor, Michael Flynn's conversation with the Russian ambassador. That leaked to David Ignatius, set off the Russia investigation. Basically, it was hugely consequential. And intercepted conversations are some of our most sensitive secrets. Trump's first year of office, there was a leak of a transcript of his conversation, President Trump's conversation with the Australian Prime Minister. And these head of state phone calls are supposed to be really, really
secure,
sensitive, and secure. And there was a leak of that. And then, of course, in 2019, a member of the National Security Staff, then Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, spoke to a person that he would never identify, and that person eventually filed a whistleblower charge, leaking the existence of Trump's conversation, another head of state conversation.
And do you remember in W's tenure, someone leaked the CIA's assessment of the Iranian nuclear program, which was wrong, but paralyzed any plans against Iran?
That too. So, I mean, I've yet to decide that this is worse than some of those, and really the media and the ones I just mentioned actually celebrated these leaks because all three of them were intended to damage the president at the time, Donald Trump.
This time, I have to look at this and say to myself, Egypt, one of the leaks is that Egypt was going to sell 40,000 shells to Putin. Okay, Egypt knows our capabilities. They know Israel knows what they're doing. They're not afraid of the Biden administration. We have so fallen apart. Saudi Arabia has given us the proverbial wave off. Now Egypt has as well, and Israel have nothing to do with Biden. Netanyahu can't stand him. Nobody respects this administration except Ukraine, which wants stuff from it.
No, I remember reading an admiring observation about Biden just in recent weeks, that he will sometimes just wave off the advice of his national security team and instead rely on his instincts based on a long career in foreign policy. And you have to think what Robert Gates said about him. Robert Gates, who served in both Democratic and Republican administrations at the highest levels of national security, said that Biden had been wrong about every important national security question of the last 40 years. He said that about 10 years ago, so I think we should amend that to last 50 years.
Yeah, well, he has subsequently updated, revised his remarks, and stood by them on this program. The president is going to Ulster. Now, I'm an Ulsterman by descent. I'm also green Irishman. I don't want him anywhere near Ulster. That thing is like fragile. It's the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Accords, and Tony Blair basically gave a statement to GBN News last night saying, I hope he doesn't screw this up, because they really don't trust him, Byron.
Yeah, I agree with you there, and this is not like my area of specialty, but I have been in Belfast and spoken to people about the tensions that exist today, and was struck by the sense that it's not really over. You're right, it is fragile, and Biden could easily do damage. It's
Oh my
well
God.
within his
James
capability.
Pogue is the Vanity Fair guy who wrote about the not still alive provos, but they're still there. And the DUP has about had it with everyone. It's just, I wouldn't want Joe Biden near anything sensitive, period. I've said that for about 23 years, though, and nobody cares. Byron York, always a pleasure. Follow him on Twitter at Byron York.
Even if these documents are authentic, or for that matter, even if they're altered or doctored, they tell a story that I've been making from the very beginning, because I support Ukraine, but I don't support Joe Biden's Ukraine policy, because he's been slow rolling our support to Ukraine for over a year. We shouldn't be surprised that Ukraine may be running a little low on ammunition. They've been telling us for a year they need more. They need more air defense systems. They need missiles that can destroy Russian firing positions just across the border in Russia. Now, I wouldn't take all this as gospel either. I mean, of course, our intelligence assessments a year ago of Ukraine's army turned out to be significantly wrong when we said that Russia would roll over Ukraine. I think that Ukraine has a great shot at having a very successful spring offensive, but it's vital that we provide them rapidly the weapons they need in that offensive, weapons that we should have been
That is
providing
Senator
them.
Tom Cotton talking about the conditions in Ukraine without talking about the documents, which are on every platform in the United States, including, I'm sure, the Dispatch. David M. Drucker, chief political correspondent for the Dispatch, joins us. Good morning, David. How are you?
I'm great, Hugh. Good morning.
Your reaction to this leak and to Admiral Kirby's attempt to tell people not to talk about it, thereby confirming that it's legit. I really just passed over it quickly because I just thought it could be disinformation poisoned. But now we're getting a wave of stories, David. What's your reaction to this?
Well, I mean, look, Hugh. I mean, Senator Cotton's assessment overall about Joe Biden's policy being the right policy, except for it's too slow, is something that a lot of people talk about in Washington. And of course, I'm playing with words there. If it's too slow, it doesn't mean it's necessarily the right policy. But the leak itself is very concerning. And every time we have a high-level intelligence leak, it's concerning because we depend on the ability to keep these secrets for our national security, for that of our allies. We need to be trustworthy for the people that we trade in information with so that they'll give us information. And I expect this story to grow. Usually when there are intelligence leaks, Washington, it's one of the few times Washington does like to assess and make sure they know what they're talking about. They make sure things are real before they jump in full speed ahead to start talking about it and dissecting it. But I expect we're gonna see and hear a lot more about this in the days and weeks ahead, because it's one of those not minor intelligence leaks that is very problematic. I think you'll see a lot of discussion about this and investigations on the Hill. And then, of course, it gets us back to, are we doing enough for Ukraine quick enough to accomplish our own goal? And even if you disagree with the president slow walking, he clearly wants Ukraine to resist Russia. And so the question is he doing what he needs to do to make sure that happens?
David, the Washington Post this morning is a volcano of stories. Egypt secretly planned to supply rockets to Russia. Story one. Story two. South Korea says leaked U.S. documents were altered and are untrue. U.S. doubts Ukraine counteroffensive will yield big gains, leaked documents say. How U.S. friends and foes have responded to leaked materials. The key countries and revelations from the leaked Pentagon documents. It's a tsunami of bad news. And this happened, and someone in the Pentagon did it. And we couldn't find out the Supreme Court leak. Do you think we'll ever get to the bottom of this one? Because this does real national security damage. I mean, Dobbs was an inevitable ruling that was very bad for the Supreme Court, but it did not put methods and sources at peril of their lives. This does. Moreover, what's it tell you that Egypt was willing to be found out? I mean, they know we would know. The Biden administration in the Middle East has fallen apart completely.
Well, listen, I mean, our position in the Middle East is problematic, and it has been for several months. And we've seen the countries in the Middle East that usually either lean on us or bend to us, hedging and making other arrangements because they're not sure what our position is going to be there in the future. And that gets into a whole range of U.S. geopolitical issues. but including but not limited to the Biden administration's approach to the region. The intelligence leak, I would bet we will eventually figure out. Usually we figure these things out. And so if I was a betting man, I would bet that we're going to find out who the leaker or leakers are.
Then they're going to go wherever Peter Hansen is. They're going to go where Peter Hansen is. This is a very bad leak. Let me ask you now about Ted Cruz, Senator Cruz, and Senator Cotton. It seems to me both of them, if the next nominee of the Republican Party wants to revert to the traditional role of the vice president, being your attack dog, like Bob Dole was for Jerry Ford, do you think Senator Cruz and Senator Cotton are sort of auditioning for that?
Well, I don't know if they're auditioning. I mean, I think we already know from watching Ted Cruz over the past dozen years that he's a good attack dog. He would be a great fit. And depending on how old the nominee is, having somebody in his early 50s who's, completed 2 terms in the Senate, is well-versed on issues, would be a good match. Tom Cotton is good on the attack, but he's so much more cerebral in his personality that he would still be viable and capable and say the right things. I just think he'd have to be the right fit for somebody that was a little bit more effusive.
Yeah, it just struck me because I played clips of both senators in the first hour today that they're very good at this. Ted Cruz's new the verdict with Ted Cruz and Senator Cotton everywhere. They're very good at doing what traditional vice presidential can. And very quickly, David, I don't think Senator Cruz is running. Do you?
He's running for re-election to the Senate. That's what
right.
He's done.
He's not running for president. Another one gone, another one down, another one bites. Well, he's not biting the dust. Senator Cruz will be there as long as he wants to represent Texas. Don't go anywhere, America. My prayers for everyone in Louisville. I have been on the air on AM 970, The Answer, WGTK, for 23 years, soon to be 24 years this summer. I visited my market many, many times, my studio friends there. And so when I heard that story yesterday about the shooting in Louisville, I was worried. And it's pretty bad. The 25-year-old bank employee has killed 5 co-workers, injured 8 other people. The Old National Bank I am not familiar with, but when the governor and the governor of Kentucky and mayor of Louisville know the CEO and like Thomas Elliott quite a lot, as well as all the victims, you know they will get to the bottom of this. Why this young man was live streaming what he was like around the bank. He had interned there for 2 years. He'd worked there for 2 years. It doesn't fit any of the puzzle pieces. And that's all I know. It's a terrible, terrible tragedy. 3 people have got serious injuries. Beyond that, 5 have died. The killer is dead. And we don't name killers on this show. But Louisville suffering this morning, and I am listening to you and thinking about you. I am also thinking about the other victims there. Joshua Barrick, who was 40 years old. James Tutt, 64 years old. Juliana Farmer, 45 years old. And Deanna Eckert, 57. Now, one of the critically wounded, Nicholas Wilt, was 26, who had graduated from the police academy, I assume, just a month ago or something like that. Assume the officer was not known to the killer. But the other 5 people, it can't be that big of a bank, although Louisville is a pretty big city. And I don't know if he had been passed over. We just don't know anything. But we have the traditional reporting. His neighbors are stunned. He's a quiet guy with a roommate. That's it. And we will wait for more. The sadness is extreme, though. And as it is always with any workplace violence, school shooting, anything. Some are worse than others. This is pretty bad, but it's not children in a school at the same time. And we have categories, and I wish we would focus more on, the Bureau got roasted yesterday for spying on Catholics again. And Christopher Wray announced, again, we don't do that. You wonder, does the FBI lab have any kind of insight into not a minority report, we're tracking everyone, but do they have any kind of profiling going on to tell you about who is likely to do this and what employers need to know about watching for this because it happens so often that both the strange alienated young male or young female in the case of the last school shooting in Tennessee, or in this case, a young man, 25, who's worked at the bank for 2 years and 2 summers beyond that. I assume he was going to college since he's interning. That just doesn't seem to fit anything. Was he twitchy? Did he have a mental disorder? Do we know what we need to tell people to look for? I don't know. Leaked documents. Boy, oh boy, the leaked documents. Let's go first to John Kirby at the White House yesterday. Now, I've assiduously avoided this story except for touching on it briefly Friday and yesterday because I don't know what's true and what's not true, and it's a wilderness of mirrors sort of thing. David Ignatius, writing about it in the Washington Post, used that phrase late last night. But it is very, very clear by now that a great deal of what is leaked is true, and it's a terrible leak. It's another stain on the Biden administration that can't shoot straight, can't get out of Afghanistan, can't deter Putin, can't deter China, can't even keep it secret. And John Kirby, Admiral Kirby, went up to spell Karine Jean-Pierre, who was getting roasted. In fact, let's play Karine Jean-Pierre yesterday. Cut number 14 at the White House presser. This is why they don't let her do the important stuff.
So I'll say this. It is also unprecedented that a president takes as many shouted questions as this president has. And he has. Okay.
I'll tell you almost every day on this.
Okay. Well, we'll certainly get the data and share
That's just
that
a
with all
lie.
of you.
Everybody knows Donald Trump took about 25 questions a day. When he couldn't stop but talk to the press. And we never see President Biden answer those questions. And we haven't seen him give a serious interview. The president has not given a serious, in-depth interview since he's been in the White House. The last time we actually saw him challenged were the debates when the former president, first time, was obviously ill and not very controlled, but Trump won 2 and 3, and number 3 was canceled. We haven't seen Joe Biden really in 3 years since the Democratic nominating debates early in 2020. We really haven't seen him. And so we really can't tell other than muffled wanderings around. We really cannot tell. On the leak, they sent up Admiral Kirby, of course. Cut number 11.
Again, without confirming the validity of the documents, this is information that has no business in the public domain. It has no business, if you don't mind me saying, on the pages of front pages of newspapers or on television. It is not intended for public consumption, and it should not be out there.
Okay, so we know that now they are real, all right? The Admiral said, I'm not going to talk about whether they're real or not, but they shouldn't be out there. Okay, some of it's real. He goes on, cut number 10. No, wait, 11. Or did I already call for 11? Is it? Okay, number 10.
We're taking this very, very seriously. There is no excuse for these kinds of documents to be in the public domain. They don't deserve to be in the public domain. They deserve to be protected. So we're going to get to the bottom of this.
And then he told the press not to talk about him. This is like draw a red circle around a story. When the White House says pay no attention to those documents. Cut number 11. Again, he's so bad at this now. It's like Karine is catching. No, I mean number 11. I'll come to 12 after I'm replaying 11.
Again, without confirming the validity of the documents, this is information that has no business in the public domain. It has no business, if you don't mind me saying, on the pages of front pages of newspapers or on television. It is not intended for public consumption, and it should not be out there.
Okay, on Friday, the New York Times reported leaked documents revealed depth of U.S. spy efforts in Russia's military struggles. But then yesterday, the Washington Post reported Egypt secretly planned to supply rockets to Russia. This is the one that really got my eye because, seriously, if Egypt was planning to sell Putin 40,000 rockets to use against NATO and against Ukraine troops and NATO weaponry, and he didn't even care. They know we listen to everything. Like the Chinese, the Iranians, and the Russians, the Five Eyes Consortium and Israel hear and see everything. So they know it. So Egypt not only doesn't care, I mean, the story says Sisi, the president of Egypt, was concerned that the Americans might find out, But if he's so little concerned that it doesn't deter him and he has these conversations, that's because American influence in the Middle East is shattered. Shattered in Israel, shattered in Egypt, shattered in Saudi Arabia. I'm not even sure the UAE, our best and most reliable Arab ally, is with us anymore. The U.S. documents also doubt whether the Ukraine counteroffensive will yield big gains. The Pentagon probe underway, according to the Wall Street Journal, is extensive, internal, and the FBI and DOJ are involved, and they're trying to very hard to find out which ones have been out there. Clues left online, according to the New York Times, might aid the investigation into these leaks. I'm going to come back and talk about these leaks later in the program with David Drucker, Byron York, Mollie Hemingway, Bethany Mandel, my Tuesday regular guest, because it's a huge story. It's a Pentagon Papers story, and it's another story of Biden-era incompetence. U.S. data raises hopes that U.S. Federal Reserve's effort to curb inflation are working. I don't know about that, but let me do the news coming up. I got a call last night from my son who said, hey, Dad, you've got to watch Succession. I usually wait until an entire show is out to watch it begin it and then watch as much of it as I want and stop it. That's how I watched the first 3 seasons of Succession. But this is the last season of Succession, and I'm not going to do any spoilers here. He said you can't follow your ordinary approach to the show. And I asked him, why not? He said, because spoiler alert, there will be all over the place. You'll see spoiler alert, but you won't be able to unsee what you see about plot twists. And he was right. So I'm not going to say a word about the show. I'm just going to tell you it remains like White Lotus, like Game of Thrones, bereft of heroes. Right? There's nobody good in the whole show. And yes, it's riveting soap opera. It's like Dallas with 4-letter words. Right? That's all it is. It's Dallas with a lot of potty talk. But it's an interesting, I'm sure it's intended to drive the Murdochs crazy, and it doesn't. My guess is they're completely indifferent to it. But the show will be ruined for you if you read the newspapers over the course or go online anywhere. I ran into it this morning doing show prep, got up a little bit early doing show prep. And luckily I had watched the first 3 episodes yesterday, and hat tip to my son. Got me clear of being spoiled. But a major newspaper, I'm not going to tell you which one, has a spoiler on the front page, on the landing page. I just can't believe it. All right, serious news. The U.S. leak has done devastating damage. I'm going to come back and talk about that with Byron York and David Drucker and Mollie Hemingway. Let me do the rest of the news. Yesterday, the State Department designated Evan Gershkovich, that's the Wall Street Journal reporter, has been taken hostage by Putin, as wrongfully detained. That means he's a political prisoner, but given that it's the Biden State Department, they won't just come out and say he's a political prisoner who's been taken hostage by Putin. And we still haven't done anything. We still have not done anything. And as Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, said in this program yesterday, and that interview remains posted over at hughhewitt.com, there are many, many arrows in our quiver when it comes to responding to this, including PNGing all sorts of Russians, left, right, and center, until he comes back. He's our journalist. He hasn't done anything wrong. He's a political prisoner, and they're blinking. They're blinking. Yesterday, Jim Jordan announced that the House Judiciary Committee will hold a hearing in Manhattan, calling Manhattan pro-crime with the policies of Alvin Bragg. Mr. Bragg's office wasted little time in responding. Don't be fooled. The House GOP is coming to the safest big city in America for a political stunt. Sure, whatever you say. It's next Monday at the Federal Building in Foley Square, Lower Manhattan. That's where I worked for 6 months in 1980 for then former President Richard Nixon, who's gone to his reward, taking the West Side Rapid from 110th and Broadway down to Foley Square. Was always the least pleasant thing in the world to do in the summer because I lived at 110th and Broadway. But I know the federal building well, and it will be an interesting hearing. The Senate Judiciary Committee, by the way, according to the New York Times, is going to hold hearings on Supreme Court ethics. And I just want you to know, Clarence Thomas has done nothing wrong. It's the endless campaign to get Clarence Thomas. And if Dick Durbin holds a hearing on this, I'm looking forward to Senator Cotton and Senator Cruz reminding everyone that Supreme Court is its own independent branch, subject to its own rules, which are adopted by a majority of the justices and cannot be legislated. And Clarence Thomas has done nothing wrong. He's got a very wealthy friend in Harlan Crow, and don't you wish you did too? And Harlan Crow has taken the vice president places, the Justice Thomas places that he otherwise wouldn't have been able to go. And that's just fine. That's a particularly fine use of your wealth to be generous to people who, by virtue of their public calling, are not making the kind of money that they would have made had they stayed in the private sector. And by the way, every justice, every single one of them, has gifts which they have not disclosed. The only obligation on a Supreme Court justice is not to rule on a case in which he or she has had a previous role or has a conflict of interest to do. And no one has adduced anything about that. They have gone over the 30 years of Justice Thomas's career and figured out he's done this trip with Harlan Crow and that trip with Harlan Crow, and Harlan Crow gave him a nice bottle of booze. That's it. It's the dumbest story. The dumbest story. There is no ethical violation. There is no statutory violation. There is nothing in this story except the Get Clarence movement, which is, look, I worked with the justice when he was the head of the EEOC in 1987 and 88 when I was the general counsel, then deputy director, and then acting director of the U.S. Office of Personnel Management. And Justice Thomas, then Director Thomas of the EEOC, was the chairman of the Combined Federal Campaign DC campaign, which is the biggest of all the campaigns. And I oversaw all of the campaigns as the general counsel. So I know my way around Combined Federal Campaign, United, all that kind of stuff. And I would go to the annual kickoff meeting that Clarence Thomas would host with all the agency heads, not as the agency head, but as the lawyer to the committee, saying, look, this is what we're doing this year. And this is what the Supreme Court was always screwing with us back then, because the previous head of OPM, not Connie Horner, for whom I worked, but the previous one, had landed us in hot water with the court by tossing out liberal groups, but not tossing out conservative groups, and tossing out groups that didn't do advocacy. And I finally fixed it with Steny Hoyer's team, and we got new rules adopted, and they work. And they required disclosure, which caused some scandal. But the key thing here is Clarence Thomas loved raising money for other people. He's a great and good man with a great soul, and I hope you've read My Grandfather's Son, his memoir. I hope you've watched the movies over at Salem Now about him. This is a non-story. All right, next story that is not a non-story. Joe Biden to make a personal push to break Stormont political deadlock. All right, Joe Biden is on its way to Northern Ireland, and he's here to help. So last night, I went and found and listened to the story of Home Rule, the bill, which laid out for the first time the separation of Ulster, the 6 counties of Northern Ireland, from the Republic. And it began in about 1912, and it was stalled by the advent of World War I. And in doing this, by the way, I was reminded of things I'd forgotten. Winston Churchill flew 140 times before World War I. I really am astonished that I didn't know that. I'd forgotten that. He founded the Royal Navy Air Service. He was the First Lord of the Admiralty when he was doing this. And he was also in charge of the Home Rule Bill. And what he brought in, I didn't realize he was just hated in Northern Ireland for bringing in a Home Rule Bill. But eventually negotiating the peace, we'll have to talk about that with Dr. Arnn. But that led me down a rabbit hole. I mean, okay, so he founded the Royal Navy Air Service in 1912 after taking like 100 trips with his pilots and figuring out that the future of weaponry would be. He didn't go for Zeppelins, he went for airplanes. He thought airplanes would be a big deal. He thought naval aviation would be a big deal. That's kind of a genius thing. But I want to know, who started Navy aviation? Did the United States get ahead of Great Britain, or was Great Britain ahead of the United States? Not to be surprised, there's a dispute. American naval aviation is, I believe, dated to 1910. The Wright brothers began training Navy pilots in 1911. And the Royal Navy Air Service is founded in 1912, but there were already naval aviation. So I don't know, and it's probably a competitive deal. Since the Wright brothers were up first, the Brits always want to be first. But it's a fascinating chapter on being prepared for an evolution in warfare, which is what everybody's missing the obvious lessons of Ukraine. Yes, you need infantry, but now tanks are a lot more vulnerable than they used to be. One of the leaks in the security documents is that the air defenses of Ukraine may not be as robust as we had hoped. We're telling this to people. It's like a real-time leak of the Pentagon Papers. Now, I taught the Pentagon paper case a few weeks ago, and we don't enjoin newspapers from publishing classified material. Admiral Kirby can lecture you, but we don't enjoin them. We do ask them to consider when they're, if we were good at this, if the Biden team was on top of things, they would have been out ahead of this leak and asking everyone, please don't publish this. You will really hurt our national security. That did not stop the New York Times from publishing the Pentagon Papers, which were not about, and Nixon was upset because sources and methods were compromised. Not because of what they said. They were all about Johnson's screw-ups, and they were many and legendary, and John F. Kennedy's screw-ups and Robert McNamara's screw-ups. But Nixon did not want the Pentagon Papers out there. And the reason he didn't want the Pentagon Papers out there is because they would reveal sources and methods. They would get people killed. They would make the United States less safe. And they did, just like this leak is doing. And the only good news is that the Russians did demonstrably go in and mess with some of the slides. And we know that. So we know that there's some disinformation mixed in with the reality. And once again, the Biden administration, just like the administrative state always does, is not telling us the truth about what is in there and what is real and what ought not to be real in a way, off the record with people who might know, that protects the national security. They're not doing that. It's sort of like there's a new story here on the new mRNA, Moderna seeking to roll out vaccines for cancer, heart disease by the end of the decade. Great news, right? Who's going to believe them? Because of the catastrophe of Dr. Fauci at the top of the COVID effort. Catastrophic collapse of credibility in the CDC, the NIH, and HHS, as well as the institute that he headed. Catastrophic loss of credibility. Telling us, you don't need masks, they won't work, we need your masks, please don't wear them all the time. We're starting with the Johnson & Johnson shot, we're pausing the Johnson & Johnson shot, we're going back in with the Johnson & Johnson shot. No side effects, very rare side effects. You need boosters, you don't need boosters, I have no idea what the policy is on boosters right now. I've had 2 shots and 3 boosters, and I've never gotten sick with COVID, and I hope I don't. It's very dangerous. And we should have been protecting seniors, and we ought never to have closed down the schools. But who's going to believe anything? And the same thing is now happening to our allies and our assurances of security when they talk to us. From Israel comes news that Prime Minister Netanyahu has reversed the decision to fire his defense minister. The U.S. and the Philippines are launching the largest joint exercise in decades. This is very good news. The Philippines realizes, you know what, China's problem. The hand of China reaches here, how Beijing pushes Uyghurs to spy on each other's overseas. And at FTX, multi-million-dollar expenses were approved by emoji. I'd cry if it wasn't so funny how bad financial oversight controls in the Silicon Valley are, whether at SVB Bank or at FTX Exchange or among all the wonder kids in the Valley. Trust Peter Thiel and basically nobody else. I'll be right back, America. Stay tuned.